Hey, welcome everyone to the 2023 Winter Sow Workshop at the Northborough Public Library. Today you'll learn the method of winter sow, how to propagate seeds using the winter sow method, these milk jugs. And at the end, you'll have kits of seeds, propagation containers, and soil. This is my third year doing this. It's a new hobby. I'm not an expert. I'm just doing knowledge sharing, mainly teaching you the mistakes that I made so you don't make the same mistakes because I want you to be successful so you'll be able to share this knowledge with your family and friends, propagate these native plants, collect the seeds, and share those with your neighbors. The pictures that you see here are this is what you should expect in the winter. We sow the seeds now, put them outside, and that satisfies the cold stratification requirement for these seeds. And I have a detailed slide on that later. And this picture is my back porch. All the jugs I had going a year or two ago, 2 years ago, collecting data for viability. So I did a study to understand how many seeds need to be sowed in the milk jug to yield 20 to 40 seedlings. So we've got that figured out. So that was me collecting data. This is what you'll learn today. You'll learn what is a pollination preservation garden. We all know what a pollination garden is. I'm going to take that one step further. Pollination preservation garden, which are the gardens that I install. You'll learn about native plants, the winter sow method, how to transplant those seedlings in early summer, and then not winter sow, but another method of preparing your seeds called artificial cold stratification. And then finally, the plant list and seed distribution. I've got 30 Dr. Jagir seed envelopes prepared to distribute. This picture on the right, that was from a workshop a few years ago, the Girl Scouts in Shrewsbury, and it was just so cute how she decorated the milk jug. This was an autistic girl, and she had beautiful handwriting, artist. So the first project I did in Northborough was at Watson Park on Lyman Street, and it's a pollination preservation garden. About 3 years ago, I started volunteering in Southborough for their native plant groups. I had a mentor there. I volunteered with the gardens, collected seed, and that's how I learned what I'm doing here in Northborough. And pollination preservation garden, we include the word preservation because we're not just putting plants in for the pollinators. The preservation means we're establishing an ecosystem. So it's not just for the bees, it's also for the butterflies and the birds. So it's the whole ecosystem that we're doing. But in particular, the plants that I work with are research-based to stabilize the at-risk bees. So in Massachusetts, a bee that's rare, and it was rare 100 years ago, those are doing okay. They're holding their own. The bees that were not rare 100 years ago and are in decline, those are the ones headed towards extinction, and those are state-listed rare protected bees. And those are the ones that Dr. Jagir is concerned about, because if that goes extinct, then it's the whole food chain. What these bees, they co-evolved with the native plants in the area, and some of these bees are specialist bees. So if that means that the bee only feeds on a certain plant, so if you lose that bee, you're going to lose the plant, because that's what pollinates it, if it's a specialist relationship. So the goals of this garden were provide habitat for the native butterflies and at-risk bees, 100% plants from Dr. Jagir's list, which is everything is native, but in particular, it's the ones that made his list that are the most beneficial native plants. Install it with zero funding, which we did. We did that through winter sow workshops, and each seed envelope that you'll get, you'll see it'll have this one, for example, 250 times 2. That means there are 500 seeds in here. The times 2 means you split these seeds into 2 jugs, and the idea is you keep one and donate one back to the project, and that's what gets transplanted to these projects in Northborough. So these were all, every plant you see here was winter sow by the community. And when to qualify for a Dr. Gier preservation garden, we're going for, we need to feed the pollinators all season. So from March until October. If you have a gap, now you've got an established colony, and now you have a gap without pollen and nectar, they're going to starve. They can't go long without nectar. And it's minimum 24 species. And that number comes because we would like 2 nectar plants in bloom every month. Nectar is the sugar, the energy that feeds those bees, and they can't go long without that food. And 1 pollen is what the bees take back to the hive to feed the baby bees. So 1 pollen and 2 nectar plants in bloom all season equals 24. And at Watson Park, we have 42 native plants in the pollination garden, and then more nearby that were already there, like buttonbush. I always heard that first year, the native plants put all their energy to developing a good root system. And I wasn't expecting any flowers on that first year, but more than half of the plants from winter sow bloomed that first year. And that's this top list. And the rest of them bloomed the second year. And the ones in bold, those are the state listed ones. And the very last slide of this presentation is a link to the Massachusetts state listed everything, fish, plants, bees, everything. You just have to scroll down to get to the part that you're interested in. But the link on this last page, it will take you right down to where the plant list is. Yes, yes. And there are other lists of what's being watched, but I think when it makes that Massachusetts state list, it's already confirmed to be heading towards extinction. And again, these aren't the rare ones. These aren't rare plants, rare insects. These are the ones that were doing well, and now they're in decline. And we're trying to prevent that. Here's another example. Adjacent to the pollination garden on Lyman Street at Watson Park is the meadow. And I need to fix this slide because it's not the preservation garden, it's the Watson Park meadow. It was installed, I bought a rototiller, I removed the field, the turf grass, in September 2022. Then we purposely planted the pollination garden densely, knowing that it needed to be divided. So I moved plants to the meadow that needed to be divided. And we also had a donation from Dr. Gier for plugs. So between those two, it was 25% populated. And the rest that you see here was from winter sow, last year's winter sow. We transplanted here. And there are still sections in the meadow that are not populated yet. I have them covered with burlap for weed control. Those are coming up. And then between the self-seeding and the winter sow this year, we'll finish populating the meadow. So all the plants in the meadow are 3 feet or shorter. I didn't want anything floppy in the meadow because I want people to see this meadow and think, oh, I've got a piece of property that would look good, and there's nothing tall and floppy. Everything's about the same. It's beautiful, isn't it? It's all it's all native plants for the ecosystem that we're wanting. So all the seeds back there are 3 feet or lower, so it's suitable for a meadow, suitable for a small front yard garden, backyard garden. Oh, I'm out of order. I've come back. This is what I did at work last year. This in front of our building on New York Avenue. If you know where the FedEx facility is, New York Ave in Framingham, right by the Southborough border, this is across the street. This is our research and development building. And there was a driveway, a U-shaped driveway that went in front. There were underground steam pipes. The soil was not right, and there was some settling that was breaking those steam pipes. So we had a big capital project. You can see way in the back, this horizontal thing. We ran the steam pipes above ground to avoid that dirt settling. And they were about to plant lawn in front of this building, a big patch of lawn that would have to be irrigated and mowed. And that's when I heard about it. And I got endorsement to put a meadow in front of this building instead of lawn. Went to Conservation Commission, got endorsement from them. They said, it's fine as long as you use Dr. Jagir's plant list. I was already using that. Those are the plants that I know. Dr. Jagir lives in Framingham. So whenever someone in Framingham has a project like this, that's what Conservation Commission is expecting. You don't put daylilies and daffodils in a project like this. This is a tough one. Not a landscaper, but I was all excited that, oh, this is going to be brand new loam they're putting down. It's going to be so easy. I won't have to dig hardly. It's bare dirt. And it didn't go well. It has in front of this building, it goes meadow, and right in front of the building is Pollination Garden. That's the one on the left, picture on the left, and the right side is another meadow. And this picture here is what happens when you put a shovel in. It has 2 or 3 inches of loam on the top, and I had it analyzed, and that's this. I'll tell you about that in a second. Followed by I think it's all clay and rock. You can when I dig in here, I have to bring a pick and use a pick. I can't even put a shovel in. And this is little blue stem. This bit here did not even go to flower. I direct sowed this whole thing. It didn't even go to seed. It stayed 4 or 5 inches high. And I think it's because this is a deep root plant. A lot of these native plants are not deep roots. I thought all native plants are deep roots and they'll store carbon and retain that water when it rains. It helps with flooding, but actually not very many of these native plants are deep roots, and you can figure that out when you dig. But grass is. They do go deep, and I think that grass was trying to go deep, hit that clay, and I think clay is not good for our plants, so the roots couldn't get established. So this bit here, this tall bit, seeded the exact same way. See how tall that is? That did go to seed. It's exactly what it's supposed to do. And what happened there was, see these trees? So there was another tree here that died, and there was a stump. And at the very last minute, the person running the project asked the landscaper, get that out of there. We don't want to see that stump. And it was kind of a hill there. So he leveled all that. And look how beautiful that turned out in that spot. So I had the soil analyzed. If you have ever done that, you can send a soil sample to UMass Amherst, and they'll send you a nice report, $20 or $30 for per sample. And if you've ever seen a bag of fertilizer, saw the 3 numbers, nitrogen, potassium, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium are those 3 numbers. So when you put that on, you know what elements you're putting on to amend. And we're low in phosphorus and potassium. So I need to find some fertilizer to help balance it to get in this optimal range for and I think we'll do better. And organic material is fine. I just don't know what to do with that clay layer. Hopefully over the years, the roots will get down there and add to that clay. So this one was a challenge, and I don't have support from the company. It's all basically me weeding and lobbying and pulling samples, but I have faith it's going to be successful. When we put these native plants in, we're going for straight species native plants, meaning no cultivars, nothing modified to be showy color or double bloom or a certain height. Because when these seed companies modify these to make cultivars, you're not improving the pollen and nectar quality. It may be the same, or it may be a less quality. So the safe way is just go straight species. If you go to the garden center and you see the common name has some flashy name to it or with a quote around it, that's a cultivar. You want to stay away from those. I mentioned before about co-evolving, plants co-evolving. These native insects and native plants, they co-evolve. So they're looking for that straight species plant. And if you have one that co-evolved that's a specialist, they need that relationship. And if you lose one, you're going to lose the other. And as far as non-natives, they may be equally as good. I know there are people studying that, but a pollination plant from another country or even the West Coast is best just to avoid those if you can. And what they say is it's okay to have some of those, but you want to have most of your garden or a certain percent of your garden for the natives. This is a screenshot of a website called Go Botany, the Native Plant Trust. They're in Framingham, headquartered at Garden in the Woods. They run this website, and their whole mission is to educate people of what's native to New England. And you can look up the species. It shows you a nice range map of per county in New England, and then also per state. They include any plant that's here or was here. They don't, it's not an all-inclusive database. They don't have plants that are only in other countries or only in the West Coast. These are native plants and also plants that came here that are not native, like Phragmites, for example. That's from Asia, I think, but it's on here because if someone does IDs that plant and they want to learn about it, Go Botany the Native Plant Trust wants you to learn all about it, and so it's clearly clear to you that it's not from here and you should remove it. When we plant, we try to plant, we should plant, install plants that are from our ecoregion. That means what part of the country is that from? And the ecoregion impacts the genetics of that seed or the plant, and that impacts the how hardy it is in the winter, timing of the foliage and pollen and nectar production. You can see the blue lobelia has a very wide native range, but if you brought a blue lobelia seed from Texas and planted it here, that seed has never seen a -20-degree winter day. It probably won't last the winter here. Same for a blue lobelia from Wyoming. If you brought that here, it's not understood what's the long-term impact of that. What if you bought seeds from a seed company in Wyoming, brought it here, and all the pollinators loved that version from that ecoregion, and they only visited the blue lobelia from Wyoming, and they stopped visiting the adjacent one that was native to here. Well, the native one won't produce seed, and only the ones that were pollinated will produce seed. So you'll end up losing your native one. I'm not saying that will happen, but that's a risk, and it's not well studied. I do know Dr. Jagir did that exact study, and he watched and to collect data and watched them go from 1 to 1. They did not have a preference, but how many how many plants did he study, but from his set, he concluded that it didn't make a difference. So those are the two. So Native Plant Trust strongly encourages don't buy seeds from other ecoregions, grass seed, anything. But on the contrary, there are people that are installing meadows large scale, native plant meadows large scale, and we don't have seed companies that are making buckets and buckets of that seed that they need. So in the Midwest, where they have more real estate, they can buy bulk seed to support their projects. And their position is they're not going to wait around 5 or 10 years for someone to write a white paper to say it's okay to do that, because it's critical that we get these native plants in on these projects. So source seeds, either collect them roadside that you know are from here, or from someone who qualifies them as from our ecoregion. These are just 3 that I was drying in my garage. The one on the left is still green. It wasn't ready. That I collected that before I knew they'll turn brown too, that obedient plant. And the excess mean I was collecting in the paper bag or the plastic bag. It's a bad idea because they have inherent moisture, and then the moisture will stay in there if you have it sealed up, and they'll go moldy. You don't want to do that. We also need to not buy plants that have been treated with neonicotinoids. As a synthetic insecticide that has a bad impact. It was approved by the EPA before they understood the impact on the butterflies, bees, and birds. Neonics is another, it's the short instead of neonicotinoids. They're systematic. They stay in the plant for 5 to 8 years before the threshold is low enough to be safe. Even the seeds produced from that contaminated plant have the neonicotinoid in there. So though, and something feeding on the leaves or the pollen or nectar, now you're contaminating that insect. And the big box stores, we think, treat them, because when you treat them, then the bugs won't eat them. So they're just trying to sell them. So they treat them. So anytime I have a friend who I know buys from Lowe's and Home Depot and these places, I don't collect seed from their yard, because I'm worried that what else, how long have they been there? What else is there? And they're probably also cultivar. This is my favorite slide on the whole slide deck. Native plants, a lot of them have a germination inhibitor in them, and that means they're not going to germinate until that compound on the right side is gone. And we all know, it's common knowledge that you need to have cold stratification for it to germinate, and this is why. As long as that compound is in the seed, it's not going to allow it to germinate. And to break that down, it needs cold, moist time to break that down. And when that decomposes, then it allows the embryo inside the seed to swell up and germinate. And it happens naturally outside. It will happen. That's why we put these milk jugs out in the winter and keep them watered with the hole in the top. And that's how we break that inhibitor down. There's also a artificial cold stratification that I'll talk about at the end. You can do it in your refrigerator. You need to. Any questions on native plants before we talk about the winter sow method? Okay. I know I get animated on it because I'm passionate about this. One way to sow seeds is called direct sow. That means sprinkle the seeds on the ground and then those will germinate. But we like the winter sow method because you have higher viability when you're in your little greenhouse. A few years ago, I read that you want these seeds to germinate the same time they germinate in nature. Therefore, we don't want a greenhouse because it will be warmer and they'll grow earlier. So I did that the first year. I even put them in the shade because I wanted the temperature to be the same as what's over there. And that didn't go well. Because they were in the shade and didn't have the UV rays on there, it grew moss, and that impacted the germination rate. And I didn't have, and then I realized that the main goal of year one is to get an established root system. You want that established before the winter so it can come back the next year if it's a perennial. And the way to get that root system established quickest is to create a greenhouse, get a warm environment so those seeds germinate as soon as possible, and fill this bottom part with roots, and then you transplant, and that gives it a head start. So if you don't have the greenhouse, it may lag 2 or 3 weeks, and that's a significant amount of time for our short summers. So you want that greenhouse. I was always told put them in dappled light under a tree or a shrub so they don't get direct sun. And when I was collecting the donations for the pollination garden at Watson Park, someone's rose milkweed was beautiful. It was really high, and I asked her, it was much better looking than mine. I asked her, what did she do? She said, nothing. I just had it in full sun. So now I put mine in full sun. I don't put them in the shade. I don't put them in part shade. I go right on my driveway where they get full sun all day long. But to qualify for winter sow method, you don't need a milk jug, but these are the attributes that you do need. You need a hole in the top for the rain and the snow to water it. You need drain holes in the bottom, so if they get too much, if it gets too wet, it will drain out the bottom. You need a head space for oxygen, and you need lots of soil. And also a hinge that we can access to sow. And then you tape it closed because that keeps the moisture in. And I have a picture at the end where I'll show you why that's important. I forgot to tape one, and it's side by side. The one is bone dry, and the second one that was taped has condensate on the top. And if you can, peel this off. If you see it's loose, peel it off, because it will eventually fall off and then litter the area. But usually they're on there pretty well, and you don't need to do that. When we make these containers, and I have a slide and even a YouTube on it, you want to max out the soil, not max out the headspace. There's plenty of oxygen in here, but you want to max out the headspace, which means cut your hinge as high up as you can, just below that handle. And when we fill these, we want to fill it all the way to the top, because and then pack it down even and fill some more, because over the winter it will compress even more. And we want that good root system before they get transplanted. And if you don't have enough soil, then your roots are, just. These are the supplies. We recommend the Coast of Maine Bar Harbor blend. It's this color bag, and that's what we have out there in the parking lot for you. Last year I was using ProMix MP, that's their organic one. And then I did some research, and I found what the content of it is, and there's a lot of peat moss in there, which is a non-renewable resource. So I'm no longer promoting that ProMix. The Coast of Maine, it's either has no peat moss or less peat moss, and the cost is the same per jug. You'll need a Sharpie and a garden marker. The garden marker, and I've got them back there. Hopefully I've got enough for everybody. You can take one. Don't forget to take one. The garden marker is UV resistant ink. So if you use a Sharpie to write on here, it will the UV rays will make it disappear come spring, but the UV ink will not. For the tape to tape it closed, I recommend the cheapest duct tape that you can find. The cheapest because it's thin, and because it's thin, it tears real easily. And it does the job. You wrap it around it, it does the job, and it comes off easily in the spring because it's cheap. And you can get it for $1.25 at the dollar store. The better quality ones, you can definitely tell a difference. They're thicker, they're going to stay on better, but that's not what we're going for. When we tape this, you're not going to get a perfect seal. In fact, you probably didn't know it, but the milk jug is not a cylinder. The milk jug shape is tapered. So even if you try to get it exactly around, it's not going to go on like a cylinder, and you're going to have wrinkles. The plastic is going to buckle. It's fine. We're just going for a baffle. We wanted to make it hard for the wind to cut through. And if it has to go a couple times through and out the top, it's going to slow it down. And that's what we're going for, just a baffle to slow it down. So don't get too, when you're taping it, you're going to be cold. You're going to be in the driveway or the garage. Your hands are wet and you just want to get it done. Just go quickly. And don't worry about getting it perfect when you tape it. But what I do is I figure out how far to go. So I make it repeatable. I start on the back and then kind of gently pat it around as I go, and then it ends on the back. Yeah, after you plant it, after you water it, and we'll have another slide on that. I don't recommend clear packaging tape because it sticks too well. And then when you try to pull it off, it frays. I think the UV makes it fray and you can't get it all off. And then when you go to recycle this at the end of its life, and now that's contaminated with it's not all the high density polyethylene, you've got tape on there. Coarse sand, sandpaper, and a water bottle with a lid, and we'll talk about that. You'll have as many of these as you want. You can reuse them a second time. The third year, they get too brittle. So please keep your jugs and use them again for a second year. And then after the second year, I rinse them out with rainwater and then recycle them. I don't bother after that first year. You can rinse them out if you have time. I didn't, just because it's extra work, but I did clean them out before I put them in the recycle bin to see where my priorities are. And you can just replicate. There's a YouTube link on the last one. 1/4-inch holes on the bottom. Cut it as high up as you can. We recommend to start everything at the same time. If you don't have real estate, if you don't have enough jugs, you can prioritize the seeds that need the longer cold stratification. Prairie Moon's website will tell you that. That's my favorite website for information on these seeds. They're in Minnesota. I wouldn't buy a seed from them unless I had to, but this one says C60. It needs 60 days of cold, and we're not concerned about the high temperature of the day. It's how cold it got at night, and that if it gets around 40, that's a day that counts, and we need 60 of them for this seed. It can get to 50 degrees, 60 degrees during the day, it dips down and that counts. So in March, it's getting this cold every day in March. So, but if you have a C90 seed, prioritize that. Get that out there in December. A C30 or a C0, get those out when you can. But prioritize those. It's just easier to get them all out at the same time and then forget about it. And even the C0 seeds, I've got friends who've been doing this a long time. Even the ones that don't need cold, like the grasses and some others, they tell me they all benefit from being out in the cold, just like in the nature, they're out all winter long, they benefit. So even though they're not advertised as needing cold stratification, get them out there because you'll have better germination if you do. My first year doing it, it's not intuitive to me how many seeds go in there. And at that time, I didn't even know about viability. When I asked the question, they said 1 seed envelope, 1 milk jug, and I did that, and that's this foxglove. That's about 2,000 seeds. So if your volunteers are don't have instructions and they have this much seed in 100 envelopes, they might distribute that much seed in that many envelopes. And it wasn't intuitive to me what to do. And what happened was I had way too many seeds germinating in this one on the right. The roots were competing, so they couldn't get established, and they stayed about 1 inch tall all summer long. And I didn't know, I could have either trimmed every 10th one to leave the right amount, or I could have repotted, which I didn't want to do because I don't have time for that. So ever since that fail, I've been on a mission to figure out how many seeds should go in there to make it easy for the people doing this. So sometimes it's 40 seeds, sometimes it's 200. This is 250 seeds because I figured out it's 10% viability. You saw that first slide. I did a study, mini jugs, and I took an average, and I know that Allegheny monkey flower, you should expect 10% viability. So 250 seeds, 10% are going to germinate. You're going to get 25. And I know what size scoop to measure to give me 500 seeds, or 500 here. I know what size scoop will give me 500. And so this is cutting edge technology. These seed companies, they sell you the envelope, but they don't tell you how densely to sow them. They don't know if you're doing direct sow, winter sow method. So we're doing knowledge share with everyone doing this kind of plant work. We collaborate and we're sharing the data. We're doing the same kind of seed packaging methods, the same type of winter sow workshops. You want to max out your container with as much as you can. There is one I'm not going to do that with. If you get wild lupin, you're welcome to do. There's not really a wrong way to do it, but for the wild lupins, everyone says direct sow those. Don't try to transplant because the roots are fragile, which is true. These wild lupins, it is fragile, and the worry is if you transplant it and you're not careful and you break a root, maybe it'll kill the plant. I don't know. So that one, you might want to just have a little bit of roots, and as soon as it germinates, then transplant it. But that would be the outlier. Usually you want to fill it up, let it grow until it comes out the top. That's what I do. As soon as you remove the tape, you're signing yourself up for, I have another slide on that, but you're signing yourself up for more maintenance, because now you can remove the tape, and you probably have vented it even with a stick like that. Now it's going to dry out. And now every other day when it's sunny, you have to water it. But if it's closed, that water will stay in there and it will just evaporate, condense. It's its own little ecosystem in there, because not much mass transfer is going to come out this hole. So your humidity's staying in. I leave it taped until they're coming out the top. So fill it with 4 inches of soil, push it down. You're trying to get the air out. Push it down, add your seeds. Then, fill it up, water it in, push it in, add your seeds, and then the seed envelope will have some more instruction. If it says surface sow, that means the seed is so small. If you bury it, it's not going to germinate because it's just the ratio of how much dirt's on top of it versus the size of the seed. It's not going to have a chance. So small seeds, dust-like surface sow on the top, and you don't cover it. But if it doesn't say surface sow, then you default for cover it a little bit. They say cover it with the width of the seed. But what I do is I distribute evenly, and then you can either add more soil on top, sprinkle it. But what I usually do is take my fingertips and just gently move the soil around and then pat that down. Some are going to be too low, some are going to be too high, and the rest are going to be just right. But even the ones too low and too high are probably going to germinate too. And it's just quicker for me to do that, pat down, than to sprinkle more soil on top. And when you do distribute it, you don't want to put them right up to the edge, because the seeds are going to end up getting washed down the edge of the container, and you're going to lose those. So kind of favor the middle part. And for the dust-like seeds, your hands are wet, cold. It's really hard to get a pinch and sprinkle it evenly. So I have coarse sand out there for you, so you can get a container of coarse sand. And if you make a mixture, maybe 50-50, the dust seeds with the sand, it's easier to distribute. Plus you can see where you've been, because you can see the sand, you can't see the seeds. So now you can see if you have it distributed evenly or not. And I make these DIY watering containers, 5/64 inch drill bit. I fill that, and then I can put the water exactly where I want it, instead of using a big watering can and it's going to over water. This I can target exactly where I want to go. No, there's no difference, but you don't want it dripping. Actually, the Pro Mix was bone dry, and you even had to put it in a bucket and mix it and add water, because it has a anti-something, I forget what it's called, but there's some other additive to that Pro Mix that makes it hydrophobic. Forget why they want it to be hydrophobic, but it takes a lot of work to break that inhibitor down. But for this is moist already. You may not even need to get it moist, but when you do at the end, after you put the seeds in, you do want to water it, because you pat it down and water it, because what we're going for is good seed to soil contact. Remember that germination inhibitor breakdown we're going for? You need that seed touching that soil. So that's why you pat it down and water it down, to get that air out. Oh, here's something interesting, not part of winter sow, but a friend told me this recently. We all know that oxygen is needed for those roots, and the way oxygen gets down there, it's not because the soil's loose, it's because highs and lows of the day, the pressure differences in the atmosphere, that pushes, then actually pumps. A high pressure will pump oxygen down. I think it's probably partial pressures of oxygen, and then on a low day, it expands, and that's how the soil breathes, and that's how it pumps the oxygen down to keep those healthy. And probably the clay layer is so dense that it's not as effective. Maybe that's why high clay is not good. You mean at my work, that meadow with the problem? That was brought in. They had that all dug out because of the steam pipes, and they installed the dirt back per civil engineering drawings, where they needed a certain number of feet of crusher stone, this sand, the loam. So they did it per a drawing, and it was
So they did it based on a system that was called off.
yeah, and it probably would work fine for turf grass because those roots don't go that deep. And the guy says, we do this everywhere on campus, exactly the same civil drawing. So it's probably fine for turf grass, and they didn't know it's a problem. Yeah, and there's something other weird about that project, because when they first did it, when people would cut through, they would try to take a shortcut. They would sink down 4 or 5 inches with their shoes. It was muddy, mushy, swampy, and now you can't even. You need a pick. So there was some settling that happened, and now it's rock hard. It's weird. Yeah, and water doesn't penetrate. When it rains, it puddles and it washes the soil into the road because it doesn't. So it's a challenge one. When I do this, I label the bottom part, because if I get to the point where I'm going to vent it and open it up, I don't want the label here. I can't read it anymore. I want the label here on the front. And then also the second year, when you know you're going to recycle it after, instead of opening it up like this, which takes up twice the real estate, I'll just cut the lid off at that point, and you want it labeled on the bottom so you don't lose. And another thing you can do, I don't do it because, but you can make, this is a yogurt container, and you can label that and stick it in. You can use a Sharpie for that because the sun rays aren't hitting that one. It will last. Put it on the top. That way, if you cut the top, you still have it labeled. When you transplant, you can use that as your temporary label until you get your drawing made or whatever. And I've got some of these on the back table, so help yourself. But it's easy to make your own. But when you make your own, don't try to squeeze out as many labels as you can. You want it really tall, because if I'd cut this in half, which I did my first year, and made it half that size, it will fall down. Then you have to fish it out with your finger to try to remember what it was. So make it tall, it'll stay in the top. And I even leave this the lip of the yogurt container where in the top, I even leave that, so it helps. Maybe not in this situation, but if you put it in a pot, it helps keep that flange, helps keep it up. Did you have a question?
I was just gonna say, through personal experience, it's actually helpful to use the garden wherever on this ones, because when you sit in your garden, like you can use Sharpie, colors, then falls like you got all lost away.
Yeah,
So,
she said use the UV ink on this one as well. It's a good tip.
makes it feel good for somehow that without fire.
And I did a test. I covered with sand on some and potting soil on others, and there was no difference in viability. And the one on the right, that's probably an example of that sand dust-like seed, so I could see exactly where I spread it. After your seeds are in, after you water it, and you'll forget a couple times, and then you have to water through the top, which isn't fun. Tape it closed. We've already talked about that. You tape it for mainly to keep the moisture in, but also to keep chipmunks and things out from digging. I recommend putting it in full sun. They say that the seedlings are most vulnerable when they first come up, and you don't want them to bake. But we had a couple 90-degree days in, gosh, what was it, April last spring, and I had too many jugs in my driveway to do anything about it. I think I tarped them, some of them, but not each. We had 3 or 4 days of that 90. And I watched, and none of those little seedlings died. So I'm not concerned about the greenhouse effect getting too hot and baking the seedlings. But I am concerned about the -20 Fahrenheit days that we had. And I think that's why I had poor germination last year. I couldn't use any of my data last year because I had terrible viability. So if we have -20 days, I will move those from the driveway to the garage.
-20 days, they don't have a germination. They're just stratifying.
Yes. Maybe the inhibitor had gone, they started to swell. And then, or even if they were totally dormant. I don't know. I wouldn't, even if it was in January, I would not take that risk. Up to you. If you pick it up, if it feels lightweight, when you first do it, pick it up, see how much that weighs, and then come back after it hasn't rained or snowed for a long time. If it's lightweight, it's time to water it manually. This is that, sorry for my video in the way, but this is that picture I told you about where I forgot to tape one, and you can see it's bone dry. It was lightweight, and the adjacent one had condensate on the lid. But that condensate, that's not a sure bet way to know if it's liquid or not, because with humidity in the air and the temperature, you could have some condensing on the edge, even if it does need water. So every now and then, just pick up your jugs. You don't have to pick them all up. Pick up one. If one needs water, they all need water. This is how I know that you don't have to remove the tape. You don't have to vent it. These are still taped up and they're all growing right out the top. This is the day I was transplanting in early June. We get lots of rain in the spring, so you may not ever have to water these things. The organic fertilizer that we're providing, the organic soil we're providing has fertilizer in it, so you don't need to fertilize it. I don't even fertilize the hole when I transplant. It's better to transplant too late than too early because of that root system. And you'll gauge by how high the plant is. You can also sometimes see on the bottom the roots, but starting in June, and some won't be ready until fall. And if you don't get germination, which will probably happen, try to put those aside and let them have a second winter, because there's this term double dormancy where it needs 2 winters. It needs the warm, cold cycle to break that inhibitor down. Then it can germinate. So don't compost your jugs that don't germinate. Have patience and keep them. When you transplant, as long as you have a good root system, you can do it. We do a hunk of seed method. You can either stick a little shovel in and pull out a hunk, but what I prefer is to tip the whole thing out. It'll come out in one big plug because the roots are all intermingled, and tear a handful off. You can probably tear 10 to 20 pieces off, and you don't need to be gentle. You can if you want to, but I'm always in a hurry, and I'm just trying to get as much done in 30 minutes before work as I can, and fighting the mosquitoes, the rain's coming. So I'm working fast and it works. I've not had any that didn't live when I did it my method. This is an example of overseeding, over the seed density too high. And it's not going to grow. You'd have to repot that if you have that situation. No, I don't have time to do that transplant into smaller and growing those up. I just leave them in here until they're growing out the top. And then I transplant when I have time. Yeah, hunk of seed method. Tip it up, break it. You want to put them 8 to 12 inches apart. And then they'll, yeah. Yeah, well, we're hoping this has 20 in it. So each hunk could be 1 to 3 plants, and that's okay. 20 to 40 seedlings in here, break that into 10 to 20 pieces or 5, whatever you want to do. And then some are going to be too close, but that's what happens in nature too. When they self-seed and they fall, they're going to be close, and then they find a good equilibrium. But when you do this and plant them 8 to 12 inches apart, that will establish a patch. And we're going for, oh, I forget the word, but we want them together. We don't want meadow style. If you're doing a pollination garden, meadow style is they're all random, and that's fine for a meadow. But our pollination garden, we're planning for the pollinators, and we don't want it to have to fly. This one's in bloom and then have to go 20 feet over there when the other one's in bloom, because they're wasting their energy. We want them to hop from one to the other. So when we plant these pollination gardens, keep them together. So plant them all in one space. So when that's in bloom, that couple weeks, the pollinators just have to hop from one to the other. And this will probably yield at 1 square meter, which we're targeting. We're targeting 1 square meter per species, and that's enough to support the pollinators in your area. So spread that out, and you can get like a 3 foot by 3 foot patch of your seed. Any questions about the winter sow method before we move to this other? This is not winter sow, but if you have seeds left over and it's summertime and you don't have the cold winter to do this outside, you can do it in your refrigerator. And to do that, I use a paper towel, coffee filter. When I fold it up, I leave a little offset so it's easier to pull it apart when I'm ready to get them out. You can see that here, the offset. Half teaspoon of water, put your seeds in, and then close that up. Get the air out, close that up, put it in your fridge. Label it with what's the species, your start and end date. And you know your end date because it's going to be C60, 60 days after you put it in. And then even though it's in a Ziploc bag, even plastic film is permeable, so you will lose your moisture over time. So every 3 weeks, check it. And if you put a paper towel in the top, it's a good visual indicator if it's ready. You can see this is dry. I added water, and you can see it's transparent. So that's a visual when it's time to add more water. And you want it moist. You don't want excess water. So tip it over and let the excess drips come out, then seal it up. They don't need light. They just need the cold wet. So that's why in the refrigerator, it works fine. It's more work to do this, but it's better to do this method than not so. It's tough because when it's finished and it's time to transplant, the seeds are sticking to your media, and you have to scrape them off or use the water bottle to rinse them off, and then it's hard to distribute evenly. So I don't recommend doing this unless you have to. It's more work. Oh, I don't know. Maybe it's a barrier for the roots to go down. Maybe if it's a paper towel and it can go right through it, but coffee filter, the fibers might be. Here's an example of when I didn't add enough potting soil. The roots were didn't have enough room to grow, so I popped it out, added more soil, and then put them back. So this is the before and after. So you want to avoid that by putting the right amount of soil in when you start. This you might get during Earth Day or at the wedding, and those seeds might need cold stratification. So if you planted that in the summer and nothing came up, it might be because it needs that, it has that germination inhibitor. So plant it and then see what happens in the spring. And this is actually what got me started on the new project. I got a new house about 3 years ago. This back part behind my house, it's backfilled with these big rocks, and I had to hand weed it because it looked terrible. And my mom suggested find out what native plants grow in your area and make a rock garden. So that's when I started researching native plants, and I found the Southborough group and learned from them. Yeah, now it's I let it self seed, and the first year was not successful actually, because I thought, well, if a weed can grow, certainly a native plant can grow. And I did my hunk of seed and put it there and maybe pack some dirt around it. And then only a couple survived that first winter. And then I realized that they need a little more care than that. So I learned how to drill in stone. So I drilled holes wherever I could with a masonry drill bit, and then added Trex board, and then cut it to the contour of the rock, backfilled with dirt. So now I've got terraced garden back here. You can see the Trex boards, and I have enough soil for the roots to get established, and that worked. They all lived. Okay, any questions before we start the last part of the program, the seed distribution? All right, I've prepared a video that will play, but these are the seeds. It looks like more than 30, but there should be 30 because I've got 30 seeds back there. And I have a recording of describing each one in Dr. Gear's plant list. So let me stop this recording, and then we'll play the YouTube.